that we celebrate every single win that Mark has. Because recovery is truly about just the small victories. For Mark, the first time he stood, the first time he took a step, all of those things were huge. Letting them know, like for Mark, we called him our warrior, our hero, and just it keeps their morale high and keeps them trying to recover. And, we didn't get the miracle that we wanted, although we got a miracle in that Mark survived this and that Mark can walk some and that he can communicate in his way that we somehow understand. What I'm saying is adjust your goals over time. Like you may have thought this is where we would be, but we have to be realistic at some point. And okay, that's not where we're going to be, but it's okay. Welcome to Aging in Style, the podcast dedicated to celebrating aging and what it takes to do it well. I'm Lori Williams. I'm a certified senior advisor and senior housing expert. In each episode, you'll learn stories of older adults who are thriving in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and in some cases in their hundreds. Whether you're an older adult or the child of an older adult, this podcast is filled with insightful resources, organizations that are doing incredible work, and stories that will inspire you to volunteer, learn, and who knows, maybe even skydive in your golden years. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Aging in Style. Today, we are going to talk about managing expectations for your loved one, for a loved one who is, in my case, always comes back to stroke, obviously, because my husband is a stroke survivor. But this could also relate to someone who has cancer, who has another type of injury or severe illness or an accident. Maybe they had a hip replacement and had some struggles with coming back from that. It could really relate to anything. And I'll probably say stroke as giving some examples because, as I said, that is my experience and kind of what my life is centered around my husband at this point, who is a stroke survivor. But I want to talk about, as a caregiver for someone, this is what we're talking about also. So managing expectations as the caregiver for a loved one who is recovering from, as I said, illness, accident, whatever it may be. And it's important to stay hopeful, but also realistic about what recovery might look like. And I've got 10 tips or 10 thoughts that I've had as it's related to the almost 2 years of stroke recovery that my family has kind of been on. So number one, most important, is really understand the recovery process. And with a lot of illnesses or accidents, especially when someone's older, recovery is not linear. So you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. We may see some progress. There may be setbacks, which are normal. And it's important not to get kind of stuck in if there's a dip in things as oh gosh, now he's not going to recover or whatever. And, for an example, personal example, when Mark was first in rehab, he fell out of the bed and thank God did not break anything, but he bruised his side pretty badly and he couldn't continue rehabbing for a few days at the rate he was going. So another example would be, I hear all the time, especially when someone's older and say they fell, broke a hip, they may end up with a UTI, they might end up with pneumonia. So you think they're getting better and then something happens. So that is what I mean when I say it's not linear and you can't get freaked out every time there's a little dip in recovery. Everyone recovers at different paces. And a lot, I've talked before, a lot is mindset. With recovery, every person is different. Some are going to try harder and can fight through the pain. And depending on what's going on, physical therapy is painful. I've watched my own husband and I've pretty much marveled at his strength. I can say, I don't know that I would be able to do what he has done because I don't think I like pain very much. Not saying he likes pain, but I think I'm kind of a wimp. So I don't know. I would do my best is what I think, but I just see what he goes through and it's extremely painful. So everyone is going to be different and it's going to depend on mindset, their body, their age, their healing, what is going on. Number two, it's extremely important to educate yourself about their condition. Ask the doctors, ask friends, like if it's cancer related, maybe you have a friend who had, say it's breast cancer, you have a friend who had breast cancer or a relative. Ask them all the questions, ask the doctor all the questions. I mean, I am Dr. Google myself, which I know is sometimes not the right thing to do, but I'm all about information and getting as much information as possible. So when Mark was in ICU that first night, I was Googling, I was constantly messaging with my friend, Kathy, who is a neurologist. I was messaging with my sister-in-law, who's a nurse anesthetist. And then, as things progressed, messaging with other of my friends who work in healthcare, trying to figure out the best plan for Mark, which rehabs to go to. So I think it's very important to understand if it was a stroke, okay, what does this mean? Ask all those questions of the doctor. And Mark's neurologist was happy to answer every question. I'm not going to say every doctor will, but he was, and I'm thankful for that. Ask everyone else on the team, if there's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, ask them all. You need to know what the goals are, understand what the condition is and what they're trying to do through therapy. And, get clarification, as I said, from the doctors. Make sure you understand all the medical terms. I didn't understand the majority of stuff they were saying to me. So I had my handy dandy iPhone there with me. And I was just typing like a maniac into the memo section. I was taking notes, the notes, whatever it is, notes section. I was just taking notes the entire time. I was probably misspelling everything, but anything the doctor told me, because I just didn't trust that, one, I would be able to remember because I wasn't familiar with some of the terminology. And two, I was a stressed out, mess myself. So when you're stressed, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, your memory's not at its very best. So make notes. If you're unsure about what the prognosis is or what the treatment plan is or, what the diagnosis, any of that, ask for clarification and write it down. Number 3, focus on the small milestones. And if you follow us on social media or read my book, Surrounded by Love, you know that we celebrate every single win that Mark has, because recovery is truly about just the small victories. For Mark, the first time he stood, the first time he took a step, all of those things were huge. And so we celebrated everything. So by doing that, letting them know, like for Mark, we called him our warrior, our hero, and just it keeps their morale high and keeps them trying to recover. And early on, I will say, I did think he would have a full recovery. I just was so focused on he will fully recover, because I did have other people calling and telling me, hey, I know someone who had exactly the same kind of strokes Mark had, and he couldn't talk and couldn't walk and he got everything back. And, I'm so thankful for that person that it worked out for them, and it gave us hope. And me and the kids, we held to that hope, and we really did pray and anything's possible. And, we didn't get the miracle that we wanted, although we got a miracle in that Mark survived this and that Mark can walk some and that he can communicate in his way that we somehow understand. What I'm saying is adjust your goals over time. Like you may have thought this is where we would be, but we have to be realistic at some point. And okay, that's not where we're going to be, but it's okay. So just be prepared to revise the goals as things change. Number 4 kind of goes along with it, which is just stay realistic, yet hopeful. So, I had to be realistic, but I kept praying and hoping that we would see some other changes. And you know what? You never know. To me, I think we have gotten miracles with Mark. Here we are almost 2 years into him having 4 strokes. 3 were massive strokes. He's here with us. He's still making us laugh by doing all his silly antics. And I just have to remember to write everything down because he does some really funny things. But he also recently moved on his right hand. He moved his thumb and his pointer finger kind of in a pinching motion, which he had no movement in that arm. And we were told after about 6 months, you're not going to see much more progress. Well, you know what? We're seeing progress. So is it a miracle, or is it that he is just working so hard and still getting therapy and working so hard towards those goals? So, who's to say? But, you stay realistic, yet hopeful, but always have your plan B. I've always, throughout this whole thing, have had plan A, plan B, plan C. I have thought of everything, or not, you can never think of everything, but I have what I hope, how we can keep things for as long as possible. But if things change, what I do have a plan for down the road. And that's important, I think, you don't want a surprise. And I'm not the type to stick my head in the sand and think everything's going to be great, because you never know. For our example with strokes, now, Mark started having seizures. So now he has a seizure disorder. At this point, he can still transfer in and out of a wheelchair on his own. But if he were, God forbid, to have another stroke and not be able to do those things, I don't know how I could care for him. Between Chris and I, it would be very difficult if he couldn't stand up on his own. So those are the kind of things I'm saying. Even though you don't want to go there and think that, you have to have those thoughts and have a plan in your mind of what's going to be next. It's important to encourage, and this is number 6, encourage your loved one to still be independent and don't overhelp them. And that was kind of a problem for me. I was trying to do everything in the beginning. And, now Mark goes to the pantry. We put things down low for him to get. We've kind of adapted things in the home so he has more independence, and I really like him to be present to make decisions about things. I think that's really important. He's about to have to go on Medicare because he's going to be 64 and a half, which when you're on disability, you get to go on Medicare early. So I have someone come into our house in a couple of weeks to meet with him because it's him, right? This is Medicare for him. And I want him to be a part of this decision. So I want him to be sitting in on it. I mean, ultimately, I'm making the decision because I know I am making the right decision for him. Not to say that he wouldn't make the right decision, but I know he's going to defer to me and trust me to do it, but I want him to be a part of it. The other thing is I really had to listen to Mark, and I don't feel I felt like I knew what was right for him, which was going to rehab. He was getting this very, very intense rehab. But he got to the point where he didn't want to go, and he was so upset and he was mad and he didn't want to go. And it made me angry because I felt like, my gosh, if you don't go, you're not going to continue to get better. You're not going to, what's going to happen if you don't get the therapy. So I finally just felt like, fine, I'm just going to give in. So we quit the outpatient neurotherapy that he had. And we were able to get him into another therapy, a neurotherapy, where they come to our house. And it took about 3 weeks to get it going, but it's been fantastic. And I think he didn't, know how to he couldn't communicate that to me, but it was too much walking that he was having to do. And it was causing him a lot of pain to have to go to the other rehab. So now he gets 24 hours a week of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. They come to our house. He has a fantastic team. And Sadie, our golden retriever, gets to be a part of it. She is a therapist as well. She's there the whole time laying down. Usually she's sleeping, snoring very loudly, but they'll let her lay on the bed with him while he's getting physical therapy, put her head on his shoulder. It's just so precious. And he's so much happier. And I will say Mark is a homebody, and to have had a year and a half of, he lived 7 months in a rehab and then going to a rehab every day. It was a little much for him, that, and that it was just too much physically on him. So we have to, even though we're in our brain, we know this is going to be the best thing, we have to consider, okay, it makes sense on paper. This sounds like this is the best course of treatment, but you got to stop and listen to them because it's their body and they're the ones having to do this. And I'm glad that I finally stepped back, and I was angry, quite honestly, that when I said, fine, just don't go anymore, and I'll figure this other thing out. But then I understood. It took me a little while, but I understood. So I hope that helps. I hope that makes sense. Number 7, communicate openly. And that Probably if he didn't have the severe apraxia and aphasia, he probably could have explained that to me and communicated. But in his case, I couldn't really understand what the problem was other than he just didn't want to go. So if your loved one has cancer or there's, something else going on, have honest conversations with them. Regularly talk about how they're feeling, what their expectations are, and just be very transparent about how you're feeling, what you're able to do, challenges as the caregiver, what y'all may be facing together, and involve them in that decision-making process. Number 8, build a support network. You need your professional support group, which like our network is this fantastic group of speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and we all have a plan, which is ultimately Mark's plan. And Mark, when everyone asks him what's most important to him, it's getting the use of his right arm back. It's not his speech, it's his right arm. And so we, the team, we all honor that. And that's what we're working towards, doing whatever we can to get that right arm. I mean, he's still getting his speech therapy and everything too, of course, but they're working really hard to get back what is important to him. And then also in your support network, you have to have a great support network of friends and family. You just, as a caregiver, you can't do it alone. I see too many people who try to do it alone. And sometimes when you dig a little deeper with people, they say, oh yeah, I don't want to bother my kids. But when you ask that question, did you ask your kids if they might want to come and help, just give you a break, give you a 4-hour break? Well, no, I just thought it would be a bother for them. Ask them. They may say no, but you need that break. You need to build that support group and not feel like you're on your own doing this. And early on, I kind of took on that whole, I can do it all by myself, and learned real quick that I couldn't. I am thankful. I know everyone's situation is not like mine. So I always like to preface that I am very thankful. I have Chris, my son, who is my angel, who is there to help with Mark. We have a caregiver who comes 2 days a week. So we have a good support group. And then, of course, we have my Abby, my daughter, who's another precious angel. She's away at college, but like I just was scheduling, I had to do my calendar many months in advance. And I just called her and said, hey, I'm going to need you next Saturday because Chris is going on a trip with his friends, which is great. I want him to do that. And I'm like, I have to go to a meeting. Can you come and sit with Daddy just for a couple hours while I'm gone? And she's like, absolutely, Mom. So I'm putting it on my calendar right now. So you need to have that support group, and hopefully your kids can help some. I mean, as I said, sometimes people just don't ask their kids. They just sort of assume I'm going to do this all on my own, but ask for help. Number 9, be prepared for plateaus. Understand you're seeing great progress and then you're not seeing any progress. That happens. And don't let it disappoint you. That is very common in recovery. Just stay motivated, continue with therapy and exercises and the routines, all the stuff. Even if it seems slow, persistence can make a big difference. And like I just mentioned, almost 2 years later, Mark's right arm, which is paralyzed, he moved his thumb and his pointer finger, like pinched, like a pinching motion. Amazing what can happen when you keep trying and keep doing the therapy. And number 10, and I kind of hit on this already, but take care of yourself. As the caregiver, burnout is real. And you need to do the things for yourself. You cannot 24/7 without a break be the caregiver. Find help. People don't always know that, especially if they're a veteran, there are some home care agencies that have like a partnership with the VA, and you may be able to get a caregiver in your home that's covered by the VA. So there's some options there. There's also long-term care insurance policies will sometimes help pay it. There's ways that you can pay it. For us personally, I mean, obviously we were younger when this happened, weren't quite ready for retirement, and I'm still working. So I did find a caregiver that I just pay out of pocket. So, it can be less expensive to hire a private caregiver, which is what I have, instead of going through an agency. Agencies in my area are about $35 an hour, which, yeah, that does add up. But there are ways, if you can't afford it, maybe there's some ways through friends or neighbors or kids someone to give you a break. But you know what? You got to speak up. And I think a lot of people, just in my experience, they just don't speak up. So that is what I have for you today, talking about managing expectations of any type of an illness or disability, and what that can look like, and kind of I hope it kind of helps you and not feel like you're alone, because I feel like sometimes as caregivers, we don't discuss all of these types of things, and I think it's really important to address it and speak about it, and you don't know about it until you've lived it. And I don't want anyone else to be going through what I'm going through, but to share my knowledge and have it out there for others is important to me, because I feel like doing something good, paying it forward, something good out of something not so great. Anyhow, share the podcast. Of course, like I always say, share it with your friends and family. And you can find every episode on my website, which is loriwilliams-seniorservices.com. or listen to podcast on your Apple Podcast, Spotify, all those places where you can find them. I think we're on YouTube. We're kind of everywhere. So listen along and tune in next week. We'll be back for another great topic. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Hi. Thank you for listening. Navigating care for a loved one who's a stroke survivor can be totally overwhelming. Yes, the internet is free and there's a ton of information out there, but also your time is valuable. That's why I wrote my book, Surrounded by Love, One Family's Journey Through Stroke Recovery. In the book, I document everything that I've learned and wish someone had told me about while I was navigating the first months of stroke recovery with my husband, Mark. It's available now on Amazon and all other online book retailers. There's also a link in the show notes that you can click to get your own copy.